Welcome to part 5 of the date table or calendar table series. This is where part 2 left off. So this is the basic calendar created in Power Pivot via DAX. And now we combine this with part 4. Now you can find both of those up there somewhere. To create an extended calendar table, right? So if you don't know how we derived to this, watch part 2, and if you don't know what we're aiming for, watch part 4. Basically, I think the most important part to understand here is that in DAX, extending a calendar table is fairly easy because what you're doing is basically more or less Excel formulas, because DAX and Excel, as far as the formulas that we're going to use or functions that we're going to use for this, are just so similar. There's only one function that actually differs, and let's just go ahead and do it and we'll see what we get to. So the first thing I want to point out is that this one already has the month year column, but it's done in a way, you can see that it's January and then there's a hyphen and then there's a 2017, so the entire year. I don't want that. What I would want is to just have January space and then just the last two. So January 17, that would be what I would want this to be. And luckily, all of these black columns here, they're derived by a formula. You can see that this one comes with format from date and formatted like this. And all I need to change if I want it to be as I said is this. So format date space YY. Right? So this will give me the format I want for this column. Now we get to extending this, because you already know this would not sort properly, right? And that was the reason we introduced the most important column, and that is the year month index. And that one goes like this. So take the year, calendar year, and multiply that by 12, and then add to that calendar month. Right? That was it. That is the year month index that we want. So we're going to let that run through. It created an error for us, and that is because we were trying to multiply by month, which is actually the month name. So let's just change that to month number like this, and now it will give us the result that we want. And this, again, this is the index that is most important here. So this is year month index, and this column is key to everything we're trying to do. Right? So basically the first thing it's going to do, it's going to let us sort this in a correct order. But it's going to do so much more. Remember, the next thing we want to do is we want to create a running 13 flag. Flag only means that you have a true or false or 0, 1 selection in the column. And this one will be exactly the same as the Excel version was, which you saw in part 4. So it's the if formula, and the if formula is going to check this condition. So if the year, so the year function of today, right? This is where it's so cool, because DAX more or less coincides with Excel. These functions are one-on-one, and then multiply that by 12, right? And then add month of today, right? So we're just gonna add that. And this more or less is the month-year index that we were calculating, or the year-month index that we were calculating before for today, or basically for this month, right? And now that I have this, now I can say, and then minus the year-month index that I already calculated, right? And this should be, and this is where things get interesting now, this should fit into two conditions. So it's going to be and, because both need to be true. So we're going to put and on top of this. And then the first condition will be if this is greater than or equal to 0, right? And then the second condition is more or less going to be the same. So I'm just going to select this all the way up to here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to get an extra comma, so I should get rid of that. And let me just slide this back a bit. And now this extra comma, I got rid of that. And now this should be less than 13, right? So that is my condition. That is my two conditions in and now I'm going to say if that is true, I want you to return 1, and if that is false, I want you to return 0. So that is my flag now, right? And this is my running 13 flag. So I'm going to let that try through and see that there's a lot of zeros, but there's also some ones in there. And if I just filter out the ones, you would see that it's either August of 2021 and it goes back to August 2020, right? Those are the months that are included in here, right? And I guess the best way to show you would be by doing this and just making that long, long, long. There you go, right? That is what we have in here. Okay, so this is exactly what we wanted. And again, we needed the year-month index to calculate this. So let's call this rolling 13. Right, so now we have this to use as a filter on a page in a report, or as a filter that you would just apply to your pivot tables, so you would always have the same amount of rows, which would be 13, and basically the same view of your report, either in Excel or in Power BI, doesn't matter. Okay, so that is our rolling 13, and now let's add a really interesting one. This one will be current month. So I would want basically the same thing as this, but where this would say August 2021, I would want it to say current month, right? And the way you do that is, again, very similar to what we just did. So that's the if function, and if year of today plus times 12, of course, plus month of today. So where that equals my year month index, right? If the year month index is the year month index of this month, then what this should say is it should say current month, right? Like that. But if it doesn't say that, then it should just say whatever the MMMYYY column says, and that is this, right? There it is. So that is the current month column. And if you don't know why we're creating these columns, please watch part 4 as we explained what's What's the need to have these columns? And this one in particular is due to dashboards, mostly due to dashboards in Power BI. So I'm gonna rename this to CM. I usually call it CM, so that means current month. And then whenever I would use slicers, I would actually use this one instead of this one. And of course, this one should be sorted by year month index in your data set, right? In your data model. Okay, and then we could do another one. I'm not really sure it's going to be useful because usually I would do the running 13, or if I was doing it monthly, I would bring this in and then just go month. But if you want to do it in a sense that you would say, I also want current year, just so I could filter to the current year anytime, and I would want that dynamic to also be able to have it on dashboards, then you create the current year. And again, it's if, and this one is even simpler, if year of today equals the year column of this calendar, then you should say that was current year. Otherwise, you should just say this is whatever the year column says. And now this one is kind of interesting because this is where we would use the year column to sort this column correctly. Okay, and the reason it's giving me an error here, that's an interesting one. The reason it's giving me an error is because calendar year is obviously a number, and it's a column that wants to be a text and a number, and that is kind of not how it's done. So what we're going to do is we're going to say format. Oh. So we're going to say format the calendar year, and I want you to format it as a whole number. But the format function does one more thing. It doesn't just format the year correctly. What it also does is it turns it into text. And you're going to see this immediately, particularly because of the way it aligns. So it aligns to the left, whereas year was to the right, right? So this one we're going to call current year, right? And again, this one should be sorted by the year column. Just so the years are still sorted the same, but there is, instead of 2021, you have the current year. Okay, and that is it. That is how you basically extend. These are the columns that we showed, even more than we showed in the in part 4, where we actually explained why we need these columns. And over here, we showed you how to create them in DAX. And again, more or less formulas are the same as in Excel. There's just 2 bits of kind of what you have to be careful about. The first one is the text function from Excel is format in DAX. It works the same, but it's just called format. And then, since this is data modeling, a single column should have a single type of data, right? And that's what we notice here when we try to just join a number and text, and it said, well, that's not, how it's done. So this is where you have to be a bit more careful than Excel, but as far as the functions are concerned, it's the same thing. Okay, so this was part 5 of the series, and the only thing left is part 6 of the series, where we're going to show you how to extend the calendar table in Power Query. Now, if you were listening to the first 3 parts, in part 3, I did say that Power Query is probably the best way to go to create a calendar for your data set, at least in Excel. In Power BI, you don't have a choice because it is Power Query in the background. There are no cells, right? You can't just do it in Excel, but you could do it by DAX. Anyway, Power Query is the best way, and that's where things get kind of complicated, because doing this kind of formulas is a bit harder. Well, not this one per se. This one definitely is a bit harder just because of the syntax. If you're not used to it, M syntax can be surprising in the beginning, but if you know other coding languages, it's not going to be as surprising. Okay, so that was it for part 5 of this series, and I'll see you on the next one.